Welcome to The Explainer. So we are currently witnessing an absolutely historic shift right now in Singapore's real estate market. For decades, the Singaporean dream basically meant securing your own piece of private housing. But man, that landscape is shifting rapidly. The government literally just stepped in with sweeping new rules that are going to fundamentally change how we buy, sell, and live in executive condominiums, or ECs. Whether you're a prospective buyer, a seasoned market watcher, or just someone who geeks out on housing policy, we're going to break down exactly what these new rules are, why they happened, and what the whole shebang means for the future. To really wrap our heads around why these massive changes are happening, we have to look at the current reality of the market. $1.85 million. Let that sink in. That is the jaw-dropping estimated median cost of a new 1,000 square foot EC today. That's basically the size of your average four-room unit. For a housing tier that was explicitly designed to be the stepping stone between public HDB flats and private condos. Seeing a price tag inching toward the $2 million mark is a massive wake-up call. It perfectly sets the stage for the affordability crisis that so many prospective homeowners are staring down right now. So how exactly did we reach that staggering figure? If you trace the median price of new EC units per square foot over the last decade, the jump is almost vertical. It's wild. Back in 2016, you were looking at a median of $782 per square foot. Fast forward 2024, and it's nearly double to $1,538. And looking at the data projecting out to April 2026, we're hitting $1,843 per square foot. Costs haven't just crept up, they have absolutely skyrocketed. This relentless upward trajectory, that's exactly why the Ministry of National Development felt compelled to finally step in. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The EC affordability crisis. 2. The new EC rules. 3. Prioritizing first-time buyers. 4. Why the sudden change. And 5. Market impact and exceptions.
Starting with Section 1, the EC affordability crisis.
To really grasp the intense mounting pressure on buyers and just the sheer frenzy of the current market, look no further than the recent launch of Revel Tampines. Check this out. On launch day, an incredible 92% of its 572 units were snatched up at an average price of $1893 per square foot. But here's the craziest detail. Normally, there's a 30% quota allocated for second-time buyers, right? Well, on that launch day, that entire 30% quota was completely wiped out by 2:15 p.m., 2:15 in the afternoon. It's a vivid anecdote that just proves demand is vastly outstripping supply. It's creating this intensely competitive environment where buyers are just rushing in, even at record high price points. Now, let's rewind for a second. When ECs were first introduced back in 1995, they had a very specific purpose. They were a bridge for middle to higher income Singaporeans aspiring to own private housing. Designed as this accessible hybrid model with household income ceilings and CPF housing grants of up to $30,000, developers typically price them 20 to 30% below comparable private condos. They were meant to be accessible. But as we just saw, that original goal is being severely tested by today's million-dollar reality. Which brings us to Section 2, the new EC rules.
So on May 8th, the Ministry of National Development announced these targeted, sweeping interventions to cool this blazing market down. And the most dramatic one? The doubling of the minimum occupation period, or MOP. Under the old rules, you had to live in your EC for 5 years before doing anything with it. Under the new rules, that jumps to 10 full years. 10 years! I mean, that's longer than some marriages. Owners are now strictly prohibited from renting out their entire unit, purchasing another residential property, or selling their unit on the open market to Singaporeans and PRs for a whole decade. It basically forces buyers to view the EC as a long-term home rather than just a short-term investment vehicle.
And this restriction also extends the timeline for full privatization. Previously, an EC shed its public housing restrictions and could be sold to anyone, including foreigners and corporate entities, after 10 years. Now, that timeline has been pushed out to 15 years. This pushes the horizon for massive capital appreciation and international investment significantly further down the road, so it acts as another major deterrent to pure property speculators. Then, there's the Deferred Payment Scheme, or DPS. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, traditionally, a buyer could pay 20% of the purchase price up front and defer the remaining 80% until the project was fully completed and got its temporary occupation permit. Buyers absolutely love this flexibility, even with the 2 to 3% premium developers typically charge for the privilege. While as of these new rules, the DPS is completely banned for new ECs. Poof, gone. Moving forward, buyers must strictly use the normal payment scheme. That means making progressive payments tied directly to construction milestones as the building goes up. It requires buyers to have a much stronger immediate financial footing, and it effectively locks out folks who are heavily relying on that deferred window to gather funds or sell off their existing assets.
Let's move to Section 3, prioritizing first-time buyers.
You see, these regulations aren't just about slowing the market down. They are specifically engineered to favor a key demographic: young families trying to secure their very first home. And this brilliantly illustrates how. When a new EC project launches, developers used to reserve 70% of units for first-timers in that critical first month. Now, an overwhelming 90% of units are fiercely protected right out of the gate. It drastically limits the pool for second-time buyers in that opening frenzy we talked about earlier. It gives first-timers a tremendous, tremendous advantage.
But wait, it doesn't stop at the first month. The government has actually extended the priority period for first-timers to 2 whole years. Developers must now wait a full 24 months before they're legally allowed to open up any remaining unsold units to all eligible buyers, including second-timers. It creates this massive, ongoing buffer against buyers who already have a foot on the property ladder, making sure the inventory remains deeply accessible to those just starting out.
Section 4. Why the sudden change? So why enact such severe, sudden measures right now? What did the underlying data tell them? Well, in 2020, about half of all EC buyers were first-timers. It was a fairly balanced market. But by the time we hit 2024 and 2025, that proportion dropped significantly, down to between 30 and 40%. First-timers were actively losing ground. They were being outbid by cash-rich second-timers who had larger housing budgets fueled by the sale proceeds of their previous homes. Basically, the original demographic the EC policy was built for was getting completely squeezed out.
Furthermore, the government noticed a rapid rise in quick-selling behavior. Between 2021 and 2025, a massive 75% of open market ECs were sold within 5 years of hitting their minimum occupation period. In the preceding 5-year block, that number was only 45%. ECs were increasingly being flipped at the earliest possible opportunity, literally selling like real estate pancakes rather than serving as long-term family homes.
Now, what's really interesting about this next point is the ultimate two-pronged strategy behind these measures. At a recent NUS symposium, Minister for National Development Chi Hung-tat explained it perfectly. He said, "We also hope this will result in developers reducing their bids and the prices for their ECs. By locking up the property for 10 years and restricting the buyer pool, the government is deliberately trying to cool down developer land bids. If developers know these properties are going to be harder to sell to speculators and second-timers, they aren't going to bid as aggressively for the land. And if the land costs less, the hope is that retail prices for the ECs themselves will finally start to come down, tackling affordability right at its root." Which takes us to Section 5, Market Impact and Exceptions. So what exactly happens to the market next? Expert analysis points toward a calming effect. Professor Sing Tian Fu from the NUS Department of Real Estate noted that these curbs will directly limit speculation. By extending the MOP and changing the payment schemes, it forces buyers to really sit down and consider their actual financial means. His assessment is that the new rules will help stabilize the EC markets over the next 3 to 5 years. And assuming economic and income growth remain stable, we are highly unlikely to see those sharp, sudden price spikes that have really defined the past decade. But of course, any major rule change has a transition period. Right now, there are exactly 5 upcoming EC projects that are completely exempt from these new regulations. They're located at Senja Close, Sembawang Road, Miltonia Close, and 2 projects at Woodlands Drive 17. Now, why are these 5 the rare exceptions? Simply because the tenders for these government land sales had already closed prior to the May 8th deadline. So for anyone desperate to avoid the new 10-year MOP or those progressive payment schemes, these 5 projects are going to be the absolute hottest tickets in town over the next year, for sure. Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to ponder. We've seen how the affordability crisis forced the government to double the MOP, heavily restrict second-time buyers, and totally ban deferred payments. They are betting big that removing the speculative heat will recenter the executive condominium as a true, long-term home for the young Singaporean family. But as we know, the real estate market is notoriously resilient and creative. So will these aggressive cooling measures successfully restore the Singaporean dream of private housing for first-timers, or will they simply shift the pressure elsewhere in the market? It's a fascinating experiment in urban housing policy, and we'll be watching the data closely. Thanks for tuning in to The Explainer. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.